Welcome to Supercool, the show tracking the rise of the low-carbon economy, a multi-trillion-dollar transformation reshaping industries and cities. Each week, we spotlight the climate technologies, strategies, and business models, elevating profits, improving modern life, and outperforming the status quo. I'm your host, Josh Dorfman. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe or leave a review wherever you listen. And if you want to go deeper into next-gen climate innovations, now scaling, check out our weekly newsletter. You can find it at getsuper.cool. 99% of what we buy becomes the legal property of a garbage company within a year. Not recycled, not reused, just gone. Once it's classified as waste, it enters a system designed to remove it, not rethink it. A system that's been with us since the 1950s, since the dawn of TV dinners and single-use everything. A system that hasn't changed. But Tom Szaky has spent 2 decades trying to break it. He dropped out of Princeton at 19 and started with worm poop, bottled as fertilizer, sold at Walmart. That was TerraCycle's first product and proof that waste could hold value. Since then, cigarette butts, nearly 1 billion collected and recycled. Lab gloves, snack wrappers, diapers, cosmetic tubes, things no one else wants to deal with, not because they can't, not just because they're hard to recycle, but because they're worthless. TerraCycle found a way to change that math, to give it an ROI. A salon works with TerraCycle and pays for recycling because it brings in more bookings. A lab pays because it helps retain talent. Same back-end systems, different business logic. In Canada, TerraCycle handles 30% of all coffee capsules. In the UK, it's over 12% of pharmaceutical blister packs. In Australia, more than 1 million people participate in its programs. Today, it operates in 21 countries, partnering with major global brands to collect and recycle waste that would otherwise be landfilled or burned. The company's won more than 200 awards, including accolades from the UN, the World Economic Forum, and the US Chamber of Commerce. I first met Tom in 2006 when he came to my studio for The Lazy Environmentalist on Sirius Satellite Radio. He'd just been named the #1 CEO under 30 by Inc. magazine. Even then, he was articulating a mission that felt disarmingly bold. Eliminate the idea of waste. 20 years later, the passion for that mission remains. But recycling still starts after the damage is done. So Tom built something that takes on waste before it becomes waste. He created Loop, a reuse platform focused on something no one else was thinking about: the packaging of our consumer products. The shampoo bottle, the ice cream container, all the same brands, all the same shopping experience, just a different system. You buy your products off the grocery store shelf, and when you're done, you drop off the container. No rinsing, no sorting, no friction. Today, Loop operates in over 500 stores across France, with major supermarkets like Carrefour and Monoprix participating. It's live in Japan with Aeon. More than 400 products in total, all in reusable packaging. Coca-Cola, Nutella, products from P&G, Nestle, all participating. And the insight is simple. It's not about asking people to do better. It's not a morality play. It's about designing something that outperforms. Better packaging, more beautiful design, built to be reused again and again. In Japan, Tom told me, waste is legally defined as a material you're willing to pay someone to remove. That's how our civilization has come to view it. It doesn't hold zero value, it holds negative value. Loop is designed to change that, to turn packaging from a cost into a durable asset. And TerraCycle sees that negative value for what it is: a challenge to build better value propositions, to help brands turn waste into customer retention, more foot traffic, brand loyalty, higher average order size, so that waste never hits the landfill and the value shows up on a P&L. Here's my conversation with Tom. Tom, welcome to Supercool.
Thanks for having me.
As you and I were reflecting just before coming on air, the first time we met, was now going back about 20 years. It was a lazy environmentalist. We were doing it in New York City. You came into the studio. We were having a slightly different conversation, first iteration of TerraCycle. We were having a big conversation about worm poop back then.
That's right. Yeah, a lot of poop on the mind at the time.
I'm thrilled to have a chance to talk to you. This is now, year 23 of TerraCycle. Year 23 of a mission and really, I think, a life calling for you in terms of eliminating the idea of waste, which is TerraCycle's mission, but it's really your mission. How are you feeling about that today? Do you have the same energy for it?
The short answer is yes, but I think there's been a lot of learnings along the way that have given a lot more perspective. I think at the beginning when we first chatted, say 20 years ago, everything was much more bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, utopian, and let's go. Where I am now is I've gotten a much better understanding of how the pieces on the chessboard move and what are the real ways that different actors, whether they are corporations, governments, citizens, these are probably the major actors that will affect our environment and this whole question of waste, how do they really, really move? In most cases, it's not what you would like from an environmentalist point of view. But what has kept the energy going is instead of just being angry about it, because generally speaking, they don't move in the way you'd like them to, it's why we have the issue. I mean, if they did, you wouldn't have these issues. If you can be empathetic to it, then there is a chance to be able to still win the game and still move in that right direction. I also think for me, waste is filled with so many crazy anomalies. That keeps it really, really interesting. And we've only grown for 23 years. That's also a nice sort of motivating factor. But then again, on the other side, so has the problem. Every year we produce more waste per capita and we recycle less of it by percent. So a lot of positive, but also the problem being still unsolved and in fact getting worse, all playing out simultaneously. It certainly keeps it interesting, but I wouldn't say it's like we've solved the issue, nothing even close. In fact, the issue's gotten worse.
Okay, so we're going to probe that last piece too. But before we get into that, I was thinking about the new R&D lab you opened recently. Is it Dr. Simpson?
That's right, yes.
Ernie, yeah. And one of the things that was said at the opening event, the commemoration of that building, was that, and I don't think it was Dr. Simpson, I think it was someone from the city of Trenton who had said this. I read this quote, and he said, what's so interesting about Dr. Simpson's life work and your life work, the legacy is not to leave behind some monument, some statue, but to leave behind less.
Right.
And to build a business around that concept is just incredibly unique, innovative, inspiring for the world we live in today, but different than what so many others might aspire to.
Yeah, it's like anti-consumption in a way. But then there's this great sort of irony of it. Here's an example of one of these chess piece moves. It's a bit esoteric, but see it this way. What makes something recyclable or not is whether it's profitable to recycle it. So what TerraCycle is all about is recycling things that are hard to recycle, which intrinsically are things that are not profitable to recycle. Recycling a cigarette butt costs more to collect and process than the results are worth. And so to be able to leave behind less, when we've collected and recycled close to 1 billion cigarette butts, we got to get someone to pay the bill. Just like we have to have someone pay the bill to recycle cosmetic waste or substitute any waste stream. Let's say you run a cosmetic company and you have Josh's amazing lipstick. If I'm going to come to you and say, well, your lipstick packaging, unfortunately, Josh, is not recyclable, but you can fund TerraCycle to set up a recycling program for the lipstick, the way you move as a chess piece, generically speaking, is you're going to say, great, I don't legally have to do this. So if I choose to do it, Tom, how's it going to increase my market share of lipstick? How am I going to become a bigger lipstick company? And isn't that an interesting sort of tension point that you have to be able to prove that out so that you can get more lipstick recycled? And I wish that tension wasn't there. I wish I could just go to you and you'd be like, great, here's a pile of money to solve this externality. But the issue is that business produces these externalities that it does not legally have to solve. We're talking waste today, but someone else could be saying this about species diversity loss, climate change. You pick the environmental issue. And the only way to really get robust funding deployed is to show how funding it will help that business.
Yeah, I think about that too. It actually was triggering for me recently some conversations we were having with folks at Amazon and thinking about Meta. But Amazon, I think it was last year, became the largest purchaser of renewable energy on the planet.
Yeah.
And so that in itself, in isolation, is remarkable. No one's forcing Amazon to do that. They still get a ton of flack, right, when they talk about it, because then it's like, oh, and you do all these other things that we really don't like, but it's voluntary.
Yeah.
But now it's because the incentive's actually there. Because one, they just need a ton of energy, and now solar in many places is the cheapest form of electricity on the planet. So the incentives align. But to come back to this and to come back to TerraCycle and what you're describing in terms of how do you get the financial equation to close, I think you were talking about the same thing. You're giving an interview in Australia and having the same conversations, probably around cigarette butts, and talking about, we're nearing 1 billion cigarette butts recycled, which is just even understand the science of how you do that, why you want to do that as a company and no one else is going to take that on. All of that's so interesting. But one of the things that really struck me about this conversation you were having in Australia was that it was also talking about the fact that when you went to Australia just a little over a decade ago, of course it started out small with various volunteer organizations and recycling bins and just getting underway. Now there's over 1 million people in Australia who are connected in some form or fashion to TerraCycles, recycling programs, and infrastructure, and that growth. So even while we're saying, okay, the problem is exacerbating, we see all this economic global development, of course that's going to lead to more problems, but the growth of TerraCycle as well has been really astonishing, both in America and overseas. How do you kind of square that as well? Just seeing like how your company's grown.
Yeah, one of the nice things about mission-driven business is that growth means more positive impact has occurred. So there's this great sense, because in many cases, if it's from a traditional point of view, growth implies more impact. In many cases, most of the partners we work with, it would be negative impacts. And for us, what has allowed for now 23 years of straight growth has been that we really always think through that overall tension. This question of, if we're going to get people to fund this externality, because that is the case 100% of the time. In every case of any TerraCycle recycling program, someone has to pay for it to occur, because the material value of these objects doesn't fund enough of the collection and processing costs. Everything runs at effectively negative economics. And so could that be a citizen funding it? And then we got to figure out what's going to get a citizen to decide to spend their money when it's cheaper to just put it in the trash. What's going to get a retailer to do it? What's going to get a corporation to do it? And that honing has been what allowed this growth to exist and to continue to exist. So if it's like a retailer, we are really thoughtful on, if you're going to run a recycling program, how's that going to bring more foot traffic to you versus a competitive retailer? If it's a office environment, let's say recycling their writing instruments, how's that going to get the team members or the stakeholders who walk through that office to be more excited about working there? And that function has been really important. And it's something that you see generally divorced in the area of recycling. In almost every recycling business is just, how do I collect it and how do I process it? We do that. We have a lot of muscle there. But the third component is what really has unlocked the growth, and especially through changing political environments. Right now, we're in a political environment around the world where there is a real leaning back from, I would say, purpose-driven activities. And you see that the most in DEI, but it's certainly also expressing in CRS, ESG, sustainability acronyms,
I do hear you on that. And so when you go into, say, you're setting up Salon Cycle, right? And you're talking about, okay, we're going to go into salons and we're going to put this infrastructure in for salons. So we're going to do Science Cycle. We're going to go into labs and we're going to set up this infrastructure to take things back from labs. The scale and scope of where TerraCycle shows up in the world is just, it boggles my mind. And it's helpful to hear how you're describing it, because then I can now understand the organizing principle. Right? We can collect from a church, we can collect from a synagogue, we can collect from a retailer, we can collect from a science lab, we can do general waste now or universal waste, we can collect from companies. But to hear you talk about it, it sounds like there's the elevation also now of this marketing function.
And to maybe jive on that, let's compare those two examples that you just touched on. Say Science Cycle, which is really focused on the waste produced in laboratories. And like, if you don't work at a lab, you may not appreciate the huge amount of consumables that go through a lab, like pipette tips, centrifuge tubes, plastic gloves, all this protection. Put that over there. Then on the other side, let's compare to something that seems almost like at the antidote of Science Cycle would be Salon Cycle, which is all the waste coming out of getting a haircut, right? You have human hair, synthetic hair. If you color your hair, all the coloration goop and aluminum and tubes and so on and so forth. Now, in the end, these may seem totally polarly opposite, but there is some interesting overlap. One example that pops up in both is plastic gloves. Salons have plastic gloves and labs have plastic gloves. So there, how we collect it and how we process it is actually identical in both of those cases. The key difference is why the location funds it and how do we communicate it and get it out to those locations. So a salon is going to fund SalonCycle because they want to show their guest that all this waste that is visible to the guest, after you get out of the salon chair, there's all this hair clippings and all this garbage in the garbage can. That getting recycled actually boosts bookings and boosts the business of the salon. Now, it's not for every salon, but for a lot of them, that's the reason that they would choose to fund it. The laboratory doesn't have any customer ever walking through the lab. But there you have very expensive talent. We're talking PhDs and researchers who are constantly working at the lab bench. And they have found that by investing in recycling the waste streams that these sophisticated technicians are moving through boosts retention. So in one example, it's boosting retention of staff is what pays the bill. And the other, it's getting more customers that pays the bill. And how you communicate to a salon in a lab is wildly different. What does it look like? But the infrastructure behind the scenes is pretty identical. Plastic gloves coming from salons or plastic gloves coming from labs enters the same supply chain for how they are then recycled into new raw materials.
And do you have the studies, or are you able to go to salons with something quantifiable that says, here's the lift you might expect?
Yeah, we have to. I mean, that's how you really accelerate. At the very beginning of launching, say, SalonCycle, we're going to go out and try to convince a handful of salons just on the theory, right? Because we have no proof. But then when we have that, the immediate thing we jump into is we need to start showing the proof of how did this effectively increase their business. Because that is the entire sort of function for how you scale sustainability. Remember, anything to do with sustainability, whether it's waste or something else, is we got to get someone to fund an externality. And there's really two types of sustainability investment. There's the really easy and the really hard. The really easy is what I would call eco-efficiencies, right? Where it's just cheaper to do that sustainability exercise. A really easy example would be if a building leaves its lights on all night, we'll turn them off, right? Now, that's going to save electricity costs. Their total expenses will go down. Oh, and it's also better for the environment. These are eco-efficiencies, and they should all be done, right? Because it is just low-hanging fruit, just being way more efficient, shipping better, stacking things better, just being more operationally efficient. The real question I think we have to ask, though, is the more challenging sustainability questions, which is, let's say our business produces negatives on the environment that money will require to solve. So if we're, let's say, make paper and we cut down a forest, if we have to replant that forest, that's an expense. Or if our production kills off biodiversity and we have to then invest in replenishing biodiversity, that's an investment. Just like if I produce non-recyclable waste, funding the collection and recycling of that, say through a TerraCycle, is an investment. These are the real hard ones. And then there's two ways to achieve that. I think one is regulations. Basically, mandate that that must happen. And that's the virtue of regulations. And I really want to say this today because we're in an environment of deregulation. Like just regulation is disappearing and the enforcers of the regulation are being laid off. The DEP, EPA are being gutted. That means even if the regulation is there, there's no one to go enforce it. There is virtues of these things. It forces businesses to take responsibility where they don't have to. The other, where TerraCycle plays, is on the voluntary side. And on the way to do it from a voluntary point of view is we got to show how it helps that stakeholder in their core purpose. So how does it help a hair salon get an extra booking? And so you go out and convince a few salons, and then you have to prove it with data. And yeah, the data is actually pretty compelling. It actually attracts people. And we see it the most when you start promoting that the hair salon is recycling everything, you're going to get new customers who may become lifelong customers. In the laboratories, it's a very different point of ROI. It is retention. But again, that is proven, and it shows that out of all the different things you can do for your team members, maybe get a nicer coffee maker or give an extra volunteer day or put solar panels on the roof. Actually, the recycling indexes really, really well on a cost per dollar basis. And this is critical because that's how you create the voluntary systems to become big. And as a result, some of our programs have become massive. Like in coffee capsules, an arbitrary example, we collect back in Canada 30% of what's produced and recycle it. I mean, that's monstrous. Or say blister packs, like the thing pills come in. In the UK, our collection and recycling programs are around 12 or 13%, which is a massive amount of these pharmaceutical blister packs. But the only way to get these voluntary sustainability programs to that scale is to show that value all the way through. Because especially now, with the economy being constrained and high amount of uncertainty, the first things that get cut are the things that don't show a benefit to the P&L. And the joke, right, in sustainability is procurement guy comes in to the sustainability person and says, I see you're doing these sustainability activities because I see the cost on the P&L. So where's the value on the P&L? And sustainability person has to say, oh no, it's not on the P&L. The value is in the environment is better. Maybe future business risk is reduced. Maybe future regulatory risk is better. And the procurement person says, yeah, sure, that's all sweet, but where's it on the P&L? And if it's not on the P&L, I'm going to cut it. And it has to survive that, because like what we are going through now is a massive retreat on sustainability in companies. And where there is the greatest suffering is startups and NGOs who don't have that value very clearly shown are just losing. Either they're not getting invested in or they're losing customers. And it's very, very difficult, especially when you're trying to do the right thing or purposeful activities.
Yeah, this is something we touch upon a lot on Supercool, and I appreciate the way you're framing it. And as I'm listening to you and thinking about companies that we talk to, like Wasteless, which uses machine learning and AI to dynamically discount items that are perishable in a grocery store, but like long before the expiration date. So you can say, well, what's the minimum we have to discount to move this thing so we don't get to waste? Yes. That's efficiency. Or like Brainbox AI, using AI in a building to understand what's going to happen with HVAC systems long before anyone's in the building and gradually heat or cool, cut costs. That's efficiency. We see that a ton, and that ROI is much easier to explain. It's not always easy, but it's much easier. And then what I see, because this is also part of our conversation in Supercool, we talk to mayors. And we were talking to the mayor recently, fascinating guy, Barranquilla, Colombia, which is now one of the leading biodiverse cities on the planet. And when he talked about why biodiversity and how biodiversity, well, okay, how biodiversity, like we know how to go restore mangroves, we know how to go do this stuff. But the why was this increases economic development. This is going to increase the tax base. There's an ROI to the city for doing these things around biodiversity. Right.
And this is the biggest sort of lesson I've learned. And you asked about then, like, what has changed in 23 years is this lesson has been like really honed and learned, is that for a mayor to do what you described, really investing in biodiversity, it's critical because you need that investment to be big and long term. So you need both vectors of time, volume, and over money to be well expressed. It has to play into the traditional thought processes. And why this is an important lesson, because some people may look at this and hear this and say, well, that's intuitive. But it's not to sustainability professionals. It's like, it's just the right thing to do. Why do I have to prove that it's going to drive foot traffic for you? You should just want to do the right thing. And yes, that would be true in a utopian setting, but businesses and even cities are businesses. Their revenue just happens to not look like sales, it looks like taxes. That's how businesses function. And we have to not just accept it, but empathize with it, because then we're going to get really good at unlocking all these points of ROI. Like, I could look at recycling laboratories and just be like, look, you should just want to do that. But I'm not going to go too far with it. And I'm going to be very disappointed and I'm going to be very drained. You even asked, the first question was like, how do I feel? Like, you have to feel energized for this stuff. And if I can be empathetic that I need to show that this is going to help retain their talent, and I really put a lot of work against that and muscles and data, that's going to unlock it. And suddenly what I want to do, which is get more laboratory waste recycled or pick whatever category, actually gets unlocked, and off we go. And it gets unlocked in down economies or unlocked in anti-regulatory environments, or where we are now is probably even anti-environmental rhetoric out there. Like, why should we care about climate change? It's a hoax. This sort of stuff is at a peak right now, right? And this is the unlocking principle. It is so crystal clear.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's almost like you go to a salon, you're like, hey, I have a platform here and a service that we can implement that's going to lift your new customer acquisition, the lifetime value of your customers. We're going to drive your business. And they're like, oh, yeah, cool, I need that, especially because we're in a down market or the market's a little shaky. Right? It's like, oh, what's the solution? Oh, well, you're going to start recycling more. And we're going to make this really easy and awesome, right? So it's like leading with the value, like, oh, yeah, it's like feed me what I need to stay afloat or grow my business. And then the solution happens to actually recycle all this very, very visual waste that all your customers and your employees can see.
That's exactly right. And the bigger the organization, the more I think this is so important, because in a small organization, you're many times just talking to the owner and you can be like, hey, what do you think? And that person can sort of have everything under their grasp, especially if it's a small business. But if you're talking to a massive organization, hundreds of thousands of employees, the person you're talking to is going to have to go through all these hoops internally to convince whoever has the purse strings. And they have to get through that process. And this is why being empathetic to this is important, because the job is, generally speaking, it's about getting them to be enabled to then come back and say, well, hey, here's all this investment and we're going to commit to it for a long period of time. And not only are we going to do that, we're going to grow it every year. Because then the bigger the impact, even if you have efficiencies, the net cost is going to still go up. And that is the case on any priority that is not just an efficiency. All right. So we should do all the efficiencies. Every one of those you described, I hope there's more and more of them, because they should always be implemented. But I think we then have to go even further, which is how do we invest in making the planet better? And that requires cash. And this is especially expressed in the overall tensions in waste. I told you, like, waste has all these strange anomalies in it. That's one of the things that really fascinated me. It's the only material that has negative value. One legal definition of garbage is a material you're willing to pay to get rid of. In fact, in Japan, that is the law, the legal definition of waste. Like, if I have an object in my hand, let's say I had a writing instrument, it's an object. It's mine. It's my property. I could sell it to you. The moment I say, Josh, I don't want this so bad, I'll pay you to get rid of it, then it has entered garbage, and it changes its construct. How you can ship it, what you can do with it actually materially shifts. Or here's another one, like, everything we buy becomes waste by definition. In and of itself, that's sort of a crazy point. Everything will, as a result, be legal property of a garbage company one day. What industry can say that it will legally own everything? They don't just transport it when they transport it. They're not just like a FedEx you're paying to move from A to B. They own it when they transport it. And 99% of what we buy becomes property of a garbage company within the year of purchase.
Wow.
And for how big of a statement that is, it is also objectively the least innovative industry per dollar of revenue it enjoys. Because it is not metaphorically gross and nasty and smelly, it is like literally that. So it doesn't attract innovation, talent. That's why most things, when TerraCycle does it, we can be doing world's first things constantly, because it is not an attractive thing. Like you mentioned, who would want to do cigarette butts? Have you ever smelled a truckload of cigarette butts, let alone wanted to interact with them? You know what I mean? Or dirty diapers, or you pick the topic. But that is really exciting from an entrepreneurial point of view, because it's all blue ocean. It's not like IT, where like if you and I started an IT idea, we would have to assume 10 other people are doing it in parallel to us, and we have to be damn good and lucky and timely, like all these things, and many things not even in our control. In waste, there's like nobody, generally speaking. But it also has a lot of these sort of odd economic tensions. If you think about, when waste was really invented, which was in the 1950s, it was a precise moment the concept of garbage emerged. Because before that, everything we made that maybe would have an end of life was made from materials that nature didn't mind. It had its own digestive systems for it. The chair we would have been sitting on, we could have thrown in the forest. The forest would have said, thank you, I will digest those nutrients. Or the clothing would have been made from wool, cotton, silk maybe. Again, you could just litter it and it would be fine. All our packaging was like the peel of a banana. You could throw it out. 1950s comes along and is invented this concept of amazing new materials and consumption. Those two things were invented right at that time. Our consumption goes up tenfold. So does our population, which means total volume of stuff is 100 times more. And everything we make, nature doesn't have a system for. I think one day it'll develop the digestive system, just like when trees came onto the world, there was no digestive system. So that's how coal got made. And then what was it, like 50, 100 million years later, the fungi and bacteria come out to digest trees, which is why no more coal gets produced after that sort of window. That'll happen probably with waste, just well beyond our time frame. And this is all fueled because we like things to be convenient, both in economics, things to be cheap, and easy to access, and so becomes this whole world of disposability. And the poorer the country, the more expressed this is. Here in the US, you and I buy our shampoo if we buy it in bottles, which have a pretty good value, which is why they're locally recyclable. If we were having this conversation and we were both sitting in India and we were an average citizen, we would be buying our shampoo in sachets, which are so cheap that there's no economic incentive to pick them up. So it even gets more pushed the lower income, which is the majority of the global population. And it goes on. There's all these very interesting anomalies and tensions, especially in the waste of our production or the things that we dispose.
Wow. Thank you for all that. That is fascinating. I want to shift, as we're having this conversation, to talk about effectively another business that you created to tackle this in a different way. When we're talking about cigarette butts and we're talking about the global expansion and operations of TerraCycle to do this now, getting close to 1 billion cigarette butts and having the infrastructure to actually be able to recycle that, the science behind that, so fascinating. But then, this probably goes back, I'm guessing, about a little over half a decade ago to when you started, probably more than that, when you started conceiving Loop.
Yeah.
And this idea of saying, well, rather than recycling something, taking it back, tearing it down, getting it back into little pellets or something where we're going to go turn it back into something else, what if we actually design a system that vastly mitigates the need to do that at all, if we're going to do something with Loop and we're going to do something with packaging? So can you take us through then the evolution of Loop, how you came to that idea? I know you're now in France and Japan, and that's what triggered for me, Tom, is we were just having this previous conversation talking about what can you do in the most advanced countries in the world versus what you might be able to do in the developing world, hence Loop. Absolutely. And where you're operating.
Yeah. To take you back to where the thought process began, we've been constantly growing the recycling thing. Today, thousands of different waste streams, from flexible wrappers to whatever, toothbrushes, cigarette butts, so on and so forth. And in the shadow of that success, we were asking, like, is that a foundational solution to our mission, which is eliminate the idea of waste? And we realized recycling is a great solution when waste exists, but it doesn't solve for the existence. And there shouldn't be waste. It should not exist, as it didn't before the 1950s. And that sort of begged the question, well, what was life like in the 1950s? I mean, it wasn't that long ago. And it was interesting. People cobbled their shoes. They darned their socks. Their milk came in reusable bottles. So did their motor oil. I mean, here's a crazy thing. I give this like standing lecture at NYU once a year. I've been doing it now for like 20 years. I asked the class, it was like 1,000 kids who just entered, how many of you have ever darned a sock in your life? And these are like 19, 20-year-olds, right? Not only did no hands go up, one kid asked, what does darning mean? You know? And it really goes to like, that's what life was like in the 50s. And then what really shifted is these things, we really viewed these objects as assets. We would buy clothing and then mend it and change it, and we would, as a result, wear it for 20 years on average. That was the average life of clothing 100 years ago. And the bottles, like the Milkman bottle, the milk company would view that as an asset. They would be financially motivated to make that bottle last as long as possible because it was securitized by a deposit from the consumer. So if the consumer lost it, there'd be a deposit. But the milk company was financially motivated to make that bottle last because the moment it broke, they would have to pay to replace it, which is why you can still buy these milk bottles or Coca-Cola bottles or whatever at flea markets, like 100 years later. In the 50s, this material change happened, which I think most people didn't notice. Packaging moved from being property of the manufacturer and reusable to property of the consumer and disposable. And odd that it would become our property when we didn't want to own it the moment it was empty. The moment it's empty, it became a liability. We would have to go find a garbage can and throw it away. We don't want to own it. In fact, we would pay someone to get rid of it. And then it became a cost of goods sold to the manufacturer. And what's the goal of any cost? Reduce the costs. And as you reduce the investment or cost in packaging, it becomes progressively less recyclable. So aluminum cans were the first thing that came out after reusable bottles in the US, and they're recycled at a pretty high rate in the US because aluminum's valuable. Those, to reduce costs, were converted to PET bottles. They're recycled at a third of the rate of aluminum cans. Not because they're technically any more or less recyclable, but because they're less profitable. Then cartons, half the rate of PET bottles, and then pouches, cheapest way to package a beverage, recycled at 0%, other than, say, a service like TerraCycle that you would pay to get those recycled. And that created this whole big issue. So we said, look, we got to go back to making packaging an asset. And one of the really neat things about that is then you can make packaging incredibly beautiful because you can invest into it a lot. It sucks to be a packaging designer now because the budget you get is lower tomorrow than it was today. Every day, the biggest megatrend in object design is cost reduction. So imagine as a designer, I just give you less tools every year to make an object. That's not so exciting. Imagine now you get all these tools to make the object you always always dreamed of. And that was sort of the beginning part of Loop. So we went around to a bunch of brands, and we work with all of these major consumer good companies. So we were able to sign quite a few of them. I think the first 5 companies were like your Pepsi, Nestle, P&G, and a few others. And they got really excited about how do we make these amazing packages come out. That was in 2017. 2019, we did this big press conference at Davos. We got a bunch of CEOs, and we launched Loop. And we were able to recruit about 200 consumer good companies, more or less all the big ones, to make all their packaging into this new reusable form. Then we started going to the retailers and said, look, you guys should start selling this because we don't want to be a retailer. We just want to help enable this to exist. And the retailers said, okay, that's all well and good, but we need to make sure our consumer is interested in this. So we said, hey, we'll solve that for you by launching websites. We'll run them for you and put your logo on them and send us your customer and see if they like it. And we did that in 5 countries, Canada, US, UK, France, and Japan. In each case with the Walmart of the US or Loblaw of Canada or Aeon in Japan, like the big dominant retailers. And the great part was consumers loved it because the only new concept is you have to pay a deposit on your packaging, which you get back in full, no issue there. And your packaging becomes better. It's now reusable, so it doesn't become waste ever. And the rule of Loop was that a package can enter Loop if it can do 10 cycles or more on reuse. And when it eventually hit an end of life, it has to be able to be recycled back into itself. So the material never becomes waste unless the package is lost somehow. Consumers in every country loved it. One of the key lessons here was we many times hear from big global corporations that, oh, sustainability is more European thought than it is North American. You couldn't tell the difference in the data between a Canadian, an American, a French, a UK, and a Japanese consumer. Then we went and said, okay, retailers, it works. Can you guys now start going in store? And they did. So we launched these 10-store pilots. And again, the consumers did great. One very interesting insight that came out was the bigger the total assortment, the total offering, logarithmically sales would go up. So if I gave you a choice of 5 products, you may not choose to purchase. But if I gave you a choice of 100 products, you would buy a bunch of them because you want to go into a system with a whole ecosystem of goods, not just one product that you buy at a time. So it's very important to note that it's like a system change like that requires a lot of actors to play.
On that point, just so it's clear, let's say I'm in France, I'm in Carrefour, their big grocery chain. Does that mean now there's a section where there are products now in Loop packaging that's clearly demarked with lots and lots of SKUs, so there's much more selection now. And I know if I'm purchasing that product that there's a deposit to be made on the packaging, but I can bring that packaging back?
You're absolutely right. In France, you can walk into, say, a Carrefour, Monoprix, Système U, Lidl, all the big supermarkets of the country. And you'll notice in 2 areas of the store, there'll be a section of the store that's the Loop reuse section. So they'll all be together there, sort of like the organic section of a store. But you're also going to find them when you shop, let's say, for spreads. You'll just see the reusable Nutella right beside the disposable ones. You'll see it there as well. And what denotes the reusable version is that you pay a deposit. And the deposit is unique by package. So some deposits could be 5 cents, sometimes it's 20 cents, could be $1, $2, depending on the package. Let's say you're getting a cut of meat. You can go to where the butcher is, and they'll ask you, would you like it in a bunch of plastic? Or do you want it in a reusable stainless steel tray? And you need to pay a €1 deposit. Now you get all this stuff, and the difference is, yes, you pay a deposit, but the package is either the same, like in a wine bottle, it would be the same wine bottle, or it's upgraded. It goes from a plastic meat wrap to a stainless steel tray. And then when you're done with it, no cleaning, no sorting, you just bring it back, throw it all in a bin, either a bag of it, you can throw like a garbage bag of this stuff into a bin, or you can put one item in at a time, whichever you prefer. You get your deposits back. That concludes your consumer journey. And then we take all that, sort it out, get it professionally cleaned, and it goes back to the manufacturer who refills it and then sells it to someone else.
Wow.
That's the effective flow of it. And the closest comparison, if you're, say, sitting in the US, it's how our propane tanks work. Mm-hmm. Right? You buy a propane tank full, then you bring back the empty one and you pick up a full one. They don't fill it for you right there. Your propane tank is going to go to someone else. Or if you're listening in Canada, that's how beer works in Canada. But instead of one product here or there, it's for today, I think in France, there's 400 different products you can buy, from your shampoo to your laundry detergent, whatever, food, beverage, frozen. all from these big brands. So it's like you can buy your Coca-Cola or Nutella or you name it in these fully reusable forms.
So it's widespread in France. You have some pretty big distribution in Japan. One of the points you said was that consumers just love this everywhere. And that's always been a question for me when we've had a chance to talk to companies like yours that are operating globally. Like, are there differences in consumer wants or perceptions of sustainability? And the answer always comes back, no. Everybody wants it. Everybody loves it. If it works and it's convenient and it fits their behavior, right? Great. Why France and Japan? Why is it stuck there?
It's a good question and a very painful one. So I want to just, before answering, just really echo that first point you said. It's a global consumer, right?
Yeah.
This idea of regional differences gets less and less every year. And the only place I ever see it now is maybe taste profiles. Some culture likes tea more, the other likes coffee. But we're all human beings and we all basically think the same. So there isn't this huge difference. And there certainly isn't that in sustainability and how one cares or does not about waste. So to answer your question on why, let's just take France. Why has France been a phenomenal success and say North America not? And by the way, this is to me a $50 million lesson because that's how much we've invested in Loop, the biggest investment so far of our company's history. This has to do with the chess pieces. The problem with reuse is that it's not incremental to the company. And what do I mean by that is, if I'm a shampoo company, the most profitable thing for me to do is invent conditioner. If I'm laundry detergent, the most profitable thing to do is invent fabric softener. You know, if I'm toothpaste, mouthwash. Have you noticed that there's something like that in every category? The joke about cleaners is like, you only need one cleaner. It cleans everything. But cleaning companies figured out if you put food coloring into it and color it different and call this one stainless steel and that one tile and that one floor and so on and so forth, people buy one of each. Incrementality is what companies, that's how the chess piece move. They're really in the business of growing their basket. And reuse isn't that. It just makes your shampoo better or your laundry detergent better. And that is an important challenge to be really aware of. So why is there even then the pressure coming to do reuse? It's not because the companies are wanting it. It's because there's a lot of external pressure. If you ask Greenpeace, it will say, yeah, recycling's not the solution. The only solution is reuse. And it's not just Greenpeace, but all these NGOs, which then are reinforced by all these consumers complaining about the waste issue and saying all you need to do is move to reusable. And as a result, that moves lawmakers, which is why there is the interest in the business community to figure it out. Now, the problem is this. In North America, there is not yet the regulations that are going to force this to occur. So what does that leave companies is they're willing to experiment and do pilots, but not go beyond them. And that's what we had. We had pilots with every big name, everyone, but we couldn't get them to scale, and these pilots cost us money. And we kept saying, now that they work, the data's there. Can we go further? And they're like, no, not until there's really that regulatory risk. In France, and really in most of Western Europe, there's laws now. For example, in France, there's a law that in 2027, if you're a supermarket of a certain scale, you have to dedicate 10% of your floor space to reusable offerings. I mean, that's pretty big. And not only is there that stick, there's also a carrot where your costs are subsidized up to 75% right now, up until 2029. So your costs are reduced, allowing it to be competitive with disposability. And then once it gets to that scale, it intrinsically does become competitive with disposability. You know, because I'm a free market capitalist, right, in my core. This reuse journey really taught me what is the role and benefit of regulation. Because when it does not fulfill intrinsically the my business will grow or become more efficient by doing this sustainability activity, that is where regulation needs to come in and saying, no, the law is now forcing you to go there. And that is a really important use of regs and laws, but not just negatives like sticks, but also carrots, saying, hey, we'll now also subsidize this while it's embryonic and allow it to grow and really be competitive. And that's why France is kicking butt. And what's beautiful is even now where we're at 500-600 stores and about 400 products, which is not massive, but it's certainly not pilot, it's now becoming cheaper for companies to do reusable than disposable. I'll give just one example there. If you think about more expensive packages, like your favorite bottle of scotch, that's a pretty expensive package. It is cheaper to collect that back, transport it and clean it, significantly cheaper than making a new glass bottle. So the whiskeys and scotches now at the scale I mentioned in reusable packaging in France are maybe 2%, 3% cheaper for the consumer to buy. Straight up. even before you factor in the deposit. Then it's even cheaper after that.
See, here you describe it. If you can get the right type of regulatory framework in place, the incentives start to align, the economics start to align. And then you can just project out. You can see then how quickly that could go.
When we map this out, for 1/3 of the supermarket, think just in consumables, think a normal like grocery store, 1/3 of what they sell, even at modest scale, is cheaper in reuse. So think like hot sauce containers, laundry detergent bottles, wine bottles, beer bottles. So any rigid package, it will be cheaper in reuse, even at medium scale.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Where reuse is not a silver bullet is it's not going to be environmentally or economically better if you're going to buy a bag of potatoes to take that really efficient, thin plastic package and make it reusable. It's not a silver bullet. And I think that's an important point, is there are no silver bullets other than not purchasing. That's, I think, the only foundational silver bullet is don't vote for more shit to be made by not buying it. It's hard to do, though. And then there's the middle ground where something can go one way or the other. But it could really have a major effect.
I've so enjoyed having this chance to talk with you and hear the evolution of your thinking. And as I think about this conversation, I now have more of a framework to understand TerraCycle and Loop. And what it seems to me is that TerraCycle / Loop are effectively three things. You are a logistics company. You have to have all this back-end logistics to make all of this work globally, to be able to collect, to be able to clean, to be able to get back to your partners, whether it's Loop, to be able to ingest all of these very difficult to recycle stuff back to you guys, to be able to then apply science and all of your technology and all of your learning to then recycle that stuff. So there's that logistics operational component, then the recycling, and then this whole sort of marketing organization that has to be a big part of, which I didn't fully appreciate. Is that a fair way to look at it? Like sort of like marketing, logistics, operations?
I think that's exactly right. It's funny you say that. Of our, like, say, 500 team members, it's about cut in a third between those three. Other than like your general, your back office, finance, legal, HR, sort of functions, the actual sort of muscles of the company, it's exactly that. We got to basically always get the waste, whether it's for reuse or for recycling. We got to do something with it. And then we got to build the business case, which is where the marketing, communications, business logic comes up.
And then I see you, and I always appreciate this. Our listeners won't be able to see the Tom Szaky uniform, the T-shirt, maybe the sweatshirt. I see you still today, just like years ago, a picture, it was on the TerraCycle LinkedIn, of you at the UN Environment Program, speaking with all of the folks who I'm guessing now you've probably been talking to for years and years and years, probably many of the same people in that room, trying to move things forward on a policy basis, on a regulatory basis. TerraCycle goes and does these incredible things at the Olympics with podiums to do these very high visibility touch point things to shine a light overall on recycling and awareness. But fundamentally, like, this is how you have to go engage in the external world to operate around those three core things that you guys do so well around the marketing, logistics, and operations.
That's exactly right. You got it. And I think, hopefully, for anyone thinking about purposeful business, this logic pattern can be applied. It doesn't have to only be applied to waste. It could be applied to anything where you're trying to get an organization to invest in doing the right thing, and the investment doesn't have an intuitive, immediate payback, like a really good efficiency system of some kind on some function of a company.
For sure. It has been so fun to reconnect with you and to be able to talk through this, and really just, I continue to be truly inspired by the work that you're doing. So I will look forward to the next time, hopefully, that we get to reconnect and get the next update. But thank you for spending some time with us today.
I really appreciate the conversation. It's great to cross paths, and hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Thanks so much for listening to my conversation with Tom. If you enjoyed it and appreciate the perspective Supercool brings to the business and climate conversation, please take a moment to subscribe and leave a review. It's the best way you can help us reach new audiences who would benefit from these conversations too. See you next time.